Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world, that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C. with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere.
How old were you? How many years? What was the age range when you were an active member of Antifa?
I want to say, I believe 22 to 23.
Okay. So just a couple of years. And we touched on this a little bit last week. What drew you in?
A couple of things. The fact that it was there, that I live in a blue city to where you could just walk downtown and become a part of things, become integrated. It's very much a part of the culture in Eugene to be a part of far left politics and to engage wherever possible. The trauma bonding amongst the people, a lot of the people in Antifa are people who are abused, who are beaten, who are treated poorly by their parents. Just like any other cult, they are society's rejects. They are the ones who feel like nobody is there for them, like they want a greater sense of purpose, but they just don't know what to do. And ultimately, I wound up falling into that category.
Okay. Well, there's a lot packed in there. So you said a minute ago that these are people, you talked about trauma bonding. Draw that out a little bit. Say more about that.
Absolutely. Most of the friends I was making at the time were drug addicts or alcoholics. I can't think of a single friend that wasn't really. Everybody had their addiction. Everybody had their flaws. Everybody had a story about their parents, particularly. Many people in Eugene are wanderers. We have drifters, we have hobos, we have kids coming in from all over. History of train hopping, a lot of the kids train hop. So you kind of have a community of rejects where everybody from all over the country just kind of seems to gravitate to this place like a magnet. So it's just the culture here to live in your trauma and to be a victim, and for everybody to just reciprocate that off of one another and to kind of keep themselves in that bubble.
That's interesting. When you think about it, how could it be otherwise? I mean, these places like Eugene, Oregon, well, Oregon itself is a state, places like where I live in Vermont, that advertise themselves as, well, like here in Vermont, it's less popular than it used to be, but it's still pretty popular. A lot of people drive around with bumper stickers on that say, "Keep Vermont Weird."
Oh, y'all got that too?
And I thought that was, yeah, I thought that was cute 20 years ago. I don't think it's cute at all now, because the kind of people what they mean by weird mainly seems to be profligate drug use with no boundaries between public and private, prostitution, which they call sex work, transing your children, anything countercultural, anything that the man doesn't want you to do, seems to be what these people think makes Vermont great. Do you think it's similar for the Oregon people?
Yeah, except for the fact that they don't realize that the man is the one putting forth all these policies. The man is the one saying, let's do this. And they're just they are horny as fuck for the man to give them all of these things. So it's an act of rebellion, but it's not really when you're feeding into the system and doing exactly what it wants you to do, you know?
What did you think communism was before you delved more deeply into it? What was your idea of what communism was?
The workers rising up against the government. You know, this sense of unity. To be sense, I had a really, or to be frank, I had a really vague non-understanding really of what it was, because you're just surrounded by people who are like, wow, I'm making a shit wage. I'm having a hard time paying my bills. I barely have any money. I'm somebody who works and the government's fucked. So what if we just all got together and came against the government? But I mean, looking back, the people I was hanging out with were working at Starbucks or making sandwiches or flipping burgers. So it's like, it's not really, I don't know if I'd classify them as the workers of America. I know those things are important, but, anytime the conservatives would come out with the truckers or any of their workers, it was kind of like, fuck them. So I think that's one of the things that
Really
broke the illusion, was saying that not all workers were together.
That's really interesting. What do you attribute that to? How does a group who believes or sees itself as having a voice for underpaid or exploited working class people, how do they then move to, these other working class people, these truckers, they're shitheads, they're not workers like me? How does that work?
I don't know, because I guess I was still so disillusioned even after leaving Antifa. I thought some of these things were just so inspirational that it had to cut through the bullshit. Like, I was down in Texas whenever the Canadian convoy was going off, and I was like, oh my god, these truckers are coming out, they're standing up to Trudeau, they're showing the people that COVID-19 was bullshit. Like, this is going to get the left's attention, right? And then it was all Nazi smearing, and even after all the Antifa stuff, even after stepping away and still in my process of healing, but I'd say a little further down, it still blew my mind. So some of these things, it still just absolutely blows my mind that they can't look at it and be like, wow, this isn't what I thought it was. This is amazing. This is people rising up against their government, banding together, doing it non-violently, mind you. Whenever the Canadian truckers were going through Canada, they were picking up trash. They were feeding the homeless. It was more like a party than a riot. Like, Antifa could have learned something if they had actually sat down and paid attention to it, I think.
There's some connection between the Occupy Wall Street movement and Antifa. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, I met some Occupy people. I was never a part of that. I would have been younger at the time, but I definitely saw it growing up. But a lot of people in Antifa were a part of Occupy Wall Street. And honestly, a lot of the people that were a part of Occupy Wall Street, I feel like some of them were the first ones to drop off, if I'm remembering correctly. I can think of a couple who they'd been protesting for years, and about the same time I dropped off, they were like, hell no. And, I haven't seen them since. I just know they hopefully went and lived their lives right after that. But it definitely, a lot of what you see in Antifa evolved from Occupy Wall Street, I would say. Because nothing ever goes away. It just evolves and feeds into something new. So I feel like that was the next place a lot of these anonymous type people could go and be masked and feel like they're fighting the good fight.
I mean, it's interesting because, Kevin Hurley, the other half of the show, the producer, had been involved in Occupy himself back in the early days. And, there is an argument to be made. People make the argument that there are legitimate financial problems in this country that have to do with the way big, high finance is allowed to basically run our country and reap extraordinary profits while controlling our regulatory system and steering the market away from a free market. So, there were legitimate complaints that were being made by people who were part of Occupy. A lot of those people remembered the financial bailouts for the banks and the lending companies after the real estate market collapsed in 2008. But that seems to be today, when I look at, and I realize Occupy Wall Street and Antifa are not contiguous. They're not the same thing. There's some overlap. But when I look at what Antifa people are doing, I don't hear many clearly articulated complaints about, okay, this is what's wrong with the finance system. This is how lobbyists have too much influence. I hear and see people who seem to me to be reflexively opposed, well, frankly, to law and order and decency. I know how pat that sounds, but when I think of Antifa, I think of somebody who's going to say, whatever is normal, I'm going to throw a Molotov cocktail at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes to show the generational differences too. Like in just such a short period of time, you know, the way the Occupy protesters handled themselves versus Antifa, that's what, a difference of 10 years or so?
About
that's
there.
how long it took for the next generation to get this way. And now it's like, what's the next one going to be? You know, I think it's personally going towards radical Islam, but I think Antifa was probably a way to devalue the voice of Occupy Wall Street, maybe to tie it into it. And, you know, kind of in the same way Donald Trump is a deflection point for other past presidents, I think a lot of what happened with Antifa and the Black Lives Matter rallies was a way to devalue a lot of prior arguments. Like Big Pharma, for example. Black Lives Matter comes in, the left all of a sudden doesn't want to think about Big Pharma. So
it's astonishing.
Trump and
isn't
Antifa,
it?
I think, are two really good deflection points for the people in power.
When you joined up with Antifa, what did you think you were going to do, and what did you think the group was going to do? What was the goal?
I thought that we were going to convince the conservatives that we were right, that the conservatives were going to pick up arms and that we were all going to storm DC together and we were going to drag Donald Trump out like fucking Gaddafi, beat his ass and kill him. Like if you want to know for real, like in my drunken rage in those moments, the times I said we need to drag Donald Trump out like fucking Gaddafi and beat him bloody and kill him. We wanted to kill Donald Trump. Let's make that very clear. Everyone wants to think that the January 6th protesters were out there to kill Biden. No, they were out there to protest the results of an invalid election from a cheating fucking president that isn't even legitimate, and we were the ones that wanted to kill and burn. Let's make that clear.
How open was that violent sentiment? Is that something that people, when they got together and hung around with each other, would this just be open conversation, or did it have to be whispered and coded?
This is the entire town. This is on the bus. This is talking with your local cashier. You know, when Donald Trump had COVID-19, I remember being at my neighbor's house, and our apartment was in an alleyway, right? So you had two large buildings, and there'd be a huge echo. I get the news on my phone immediately that Donald Trump got COVID-19. I open their back door, and I scream, Donald Trump got motherfucking COVID-19! And for a moment, there's silence, and I feel kind of silly for doing it. But then all the kids in the apartment, which, I mean, we're talking about like 100 apartment windows, and my apartment and the next one, screaming and cheering and clapping and hooting and hollering. And for a minute or two in the alley, it was a party. And then everybody just went back inside to live their lives. I will never forget that.
It sounds like you had a lovely brutalist Soviet concrete apartment block that you all lived in happily.
And that's the U of O campus.
And so you know, as you know, I see this real connection between kids who grow up in homes that are headed by personality disordered parents ending up, I mean, our life outcomes, all you need to do is look at the statistics. So a huge number of us end up becoming drunks or drug addicts ourselves. A disproportionate number of us will end up developing personality disorders of our own. And I don't know if this has always been the case throughout history. I don't have the data. But what I see today is just this. I see narcissistic, emotionally unstable, manipulative behavior posing as a victim in order to extract resources from other people. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody else without pointing them at myself as well, because I spent most of my adult life I'd long been a registered Democrat, but I got more and more leftist and more woke as time went on. And I cannot help but notice that people who cleave to the left right now, especially as time goes on, especially as we've seen how extreme the left has gone. I mean, the left went from a party that at least perceived itself to be fighting for the rights of working class people, people who had genuinely been done wrong, fighting against the power of corporations to order our lives, has turned around. And, as you mentioned before, you can't criticize Big Pharma among the left anymore. You get called an anti-vaxxer, a kooky right-winger. I see this really strong connection between an unbalanced and dysfunctional childhood and cleaving to leftist politics as an adult. I don't know what you've noticed as you've gone along.
No, I think you're completely right, and that's exactly what Yuri Bezmov warned us about. You know, this is the demoralization, this is the destabilization, this is the attack on the family unit. This is, no matter how many times I came to these people in Antifa and showed them evidence to the contrary, they would not, for one moment, take a step over the line and say maybe my beliefs were incorrect. The family unit is 100% under attack. And the Democratic Party and liberalism has succumbed to a death cult. You know, that Alex Jones put it best. It's Team Death Cult versus Team Humanity. And Team Death Cult got its claws into the Democratic Party, into the liberal institutions, because it was exactly that. It was going to expose Big Pharma. It was going to expose Bush. It was going to expose the government. It was going to expose Anthony Fauci and the NIH on why they were withholding AIDS medication for people back during the AIDS crisis. Anthony Fauci, the man who killed gays, now gets a Disney special for COVID-19. People have been indoctrinated into a death cult.
Yeah, they have. I mean, you saw it last week. We covered this on the show in the Netherlands. A 28-year-old woman who's been diagnosed with autism and borderline personality disorder has signed herself up for state-run euthanasia.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, I'm just like, what's the deal with the left wanting to kill everybody right now?
These Nazis were smarter than we could have ever imagined. That's the thing, is like, you know, Antifa needs to realize there are Nazis out there, and they have embedded themselves in the Democratic Party. Benjamin Boyce did a fantastic interview with a First Nation member girl in Canada, and she goes into it. She talks about how Canada sterilized her through the transitionary process and how she was on the MAIDS process and how she was going to go through with killing herself because she wanted to look that doctor in the eye and ask them, how do you unsterilize the Indian? This is modern institutions finishing up what the institutions of old could not. You know, they don't come out and say, we're going to hunt the Indians, we're going to hunt the Mexicans, we're going to make sure the blacks can't be born, we're going to get rid of autism, we're going to get rid of gay. They come with the flag of communism saying, we're going to help you, we're going to liberate you, we're going to diversify you. And meanwhile, they're killing us. And people that I know that were a part of that, maybe the ones who aren't going out, they're going to go in prison. They're going to die. Some of them have had fentanyl. Some of them have had suicide attempts. And the ones who aren't, that are about it, Lord knows what they're going to do. You know, I can tell you what, like, the average Antifa member is, but the reason I want people to speak out is because there are terrorists within Antifa. There are people who will be willing to take this fucking far if it's not called out and if it's not exposed.
What do you think is stopping? Because this really surprises me. The degree to which the respectable left and our politicians will not acknowledge that Antifa is a terrorist group.
They don't acknowledge
that
it because it's all part of the plan. I almost went up to Seattle whenever they did Chaz because the mayor was saying it was going to be a summer of love. I even bragged to my family. I'm like, man, y'all don't even know what we're doing up here. We're fighting the good fight. I'm going to go to the summer of love. Thank God for alcoholism. I couldn't afford the summer of love. But it turned into murder and drugs and booze and a party, and you know, it's so disrespectful. And, you know, everybody wants to pretend this is about Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Let me tell you, any race would have done. This could have been built around Asians, people would have rioted. This could have been built around Mexicans, people would have rioted. People just wanted to riot. This wasn't about black people, ever. You know, George Floyd wasn't even murdered. Yeah. Funny that we didn't get that video until after Derek Chauvin is stabbed in prison.
The trauma model. People who have no defined genetic abnormality, all within a range of normal, and something's come in from the environment to hurt them. Now, it could be a bullet, could be a car, could be a virus or bacteria. It blows from the environment that throw them out of balance.
Sits alone and listens to his mother cry about how she wants to die because she cannot provide, and her children sleep together because it's so cold outside, and she don't know that loves her, but she keeps him up all night. And his sisters will be mothers like her, and his brother's absent fathers like theirs. He'll grow up to shoot some men, so in turn he'll get shot back. My bullet wounds start to ache, I predict rain. And that's
So what we're seeing is an understandable reaction to trauma from the environment. Psychological, social, and emotional trauma. In the town, crime in the neighborhood. And then we've got to start looking at your overall body, mind, soul, spirit health.
a child laid alone, couldn't sleep, she toss and turn, fidgety and finicky, like the skin she wasn't burned. And her father had to teach her what a mother only should, and it took her further than any college degree could. What the boy liked the most was the way she never let it show. And since he found her body, he just sits out on the coast, all alone with the ocean's bones, skipping stones with her ghost. And that's
Your mother died 3 years ago. You had a pretty complicated relationship with her. She knew that the sexual abuse by your dad was going on. She didn't do anything about it. Dad left when you were 12 to get a new girlfriend. And so you had a lot of resentment at mom. She was the only parent who stuck around, and then she had the 2 abusive stepdads that came into the picture.
It's the motherfucking boogeyman. I drop to my knees and pray that I can change my ways. I've been watching people die since I was a boy. My own life don't even matter to me. Imagine how I feel about yours. Growing up just means a game where 2 kids fight over a weapon and the loser's slain. You best be man enough to squeeze the gun right in his heart, cause his head won't always get it done.
The alternate paradigm that I subscribe to is called the trauma